Hello, Rhonda. Huge welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm already feeling like this is going to be a glorious conversation just based on where we've been already. Most of it was trying to sort out tech, but even that was quite delightful. So I've got a feeling we're going to do just fine. So we were just talking about our mutual passion, love, devotion to British shamanism. And we're going to then go into a particular focus of yours. But I first just felt like it would be wonderful to hear what brought you to this work.
So originally, as many of us who find ourselves in this work, there was a long period of difficulty, darkness, struggle, and I talk about that in various places. People can find out if they're interested. And looking back now, it was like being, I don't know how you would really describe it, pursued into this kind of calling. And after a death in the family, my dad died, I kind of crashed into shamanism in my 30s. And the cliche term of coming home, you hear lots of us talk about it, don't we? It's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe there's something that actually works for me. I can't believe there's something that makes me feel like I have a belonging, like I have a place, like I have a calling. And I trained initially, if my daughter went to school with this other lassie, and her mum was a shamanic practitioner, and I always thought she was a bit of a weirdo. She was lovely, but she was a bit weird. I was like, you're a bit weird. So I was an accountant and worked in quite a corporate environment.
No way.
Yeah.
I love that so much. Do you find that's also, it's interesting already that so many similarities between us. My path really began on the death of my father too, and I also was in the corporate world. And I find that so many of us, it's like the real kind of like one world to another. But yeah, I wasn't expecting you to say an accountant.
No. Well, there's a whole story behind how that happened. It's quite funny, but it did well for me. It was good for me to a certain extent, and but it definitely wasn't where I was
It wasn't your
meant
calling.
to be. No, definitely not. I'm not even particularly good with numbers. It's a very funny story. Anyway, so I meet this woman, and she's like, oh, I'm doing this class. Would you be interested? And I thought, oh, okay. And I booked it actually before my dad died because it was such a quick death for him, unexpected. And it was a couple of months after he had died, and I thought, oh well, I've paid the money, I don't want to let her down, I'll just go. And it was I just cannot describe. There was only 3 of us in the class, and we each brought our own very deep, difficult material to that space. And I don't remember a time it still makes me emotional thinking about it. I don't ever remember a time being held like that by anybody. It just had never existed for me. And I just dove into it with like single-minded determination. I'd signed up for a 6-month deep dive with this lady, and it was called the Little Red Drum at the time. She changed that to the Centre for Creative Vision, and then I did 3 years of training with her, and then another year, and it was core shamanism essentially. She trained with Sandra Ingerman, so that was kind of the path, like my great grandmother route, if you will. But she also, it was called creative shamanism, so there was a real like invitation to finding your own path and not method based and not following the rules that other people subscribed. So that was like really the basis of my teaching, was like finding my own way, which is exactly what I did because it's in my nature as well. I don't do well with rules. So I started to practice and immediately started seeing people, and I worked at the same time as shifting. So I was shifting between board meetings on one hand and shamanic rituals in the woods on the other. Great fun. It was such a magical time, and being able to bridge the gap between shamanic practice and business, and how my business life improved massively because I was able to put some things into practice there that were really magical. But then I went to the UK Shamanic gathering a few years ago now in Glastonbury, and I met this wifey who was great, and she was doing a class on Celtic shamanism, and I thought, oh, I wonder what that is. I mean, I knew the word Celtic, but it never really resonated. I didn't really. I tended to just do my own thing. I don't like labels. They always make me feel a bit uncomfortable. So I went to this class, and I was like, oh, this that's exciting. And she was great. She's her name's Sam McLaren, and she's a Celticist, and at the time was mentoring under a Harvard scholar who works with Indigenous wisdom, Indigenous British and Celtic wisdom.
Oh, wow.
So we became friends, and I've learned from her over the years. So she really, I don't know, it felt like coming home a second time, because a lot of what I've since discovered about British practices, Scottish practices in particular, is that I was doing a lot of it already. Like a lot of my colleagues were working in fours, 4 directions, 4 winds, and I was working in threes. I couldn't bring myself to work in fours, it just didn't feel right. And 3 is the sacred number in British or Celtic shamanism. So there was all these synchronicities that started to show themselves to me that really gave me confidence to know that I had found my way there naturally through listening to my spirit guides and listening to the wisdom that I was given, rather than listening to the books and the lists and the how-tos and the methods. So that's how I found my way to Celtic shamanism or British shamanism. I'm very grateful to Sam, who's still a very good friend, and she's now finished her Celtic degree, and I'm hoping that she's got some amazing research that she's been doing. And I'm not going to talk about it yet because it's hard work, but she is in the process of writing a book, and it's really cool. So I'm very excited to start to talk about that when that comes out.
Certainly sounds like someone else I ought to interview too. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, she's amazing.
So needed. Wow. And I love what you've said there. Like we was talking before we started recording that without the connection with our actual land, the spirits of this land, for me, it's not really shamanism. Like it's all about the place. It's the setting we're in that is ultimately going to teach us. Is that we're working with. And similarly, so much of my own path I've been taught directly by my guides and by the land. And of course, it's so helpful to have teachers either of this land or other lands to kind of help open doorways. But ultimately, there's nothing that can replace that kind of what's already here and still waiting to show us. So I love what you've said there. So moving into the tantalizing description you gave me of the Three Cauldrons earlier, I would love to now explore all things that.
All right. So the Three Cauldron power centers are based on a poem that was written by probably a range of medieval poets and found in this ancient manuscript. And it's amazing. It really left like a slice of Indigenous wisdom. It's quite magic. You can find one of the original translations. One of the things to say, so I'm just going to I get very excited about this topic. So if I jump around a bit, take notes. Okay. So the thing about this poem is it's been translated from, a really like an ancient language. So there's a few different versions that you can find. There's the New Age version, which removes all of the reference to Christianity. Some people like to say that that's a pre-Christian version, but the actual version that we have is mildly Christianized, not like some of the other texts that are highly Christianized. This one's mildly Christianized. But to me, that just takes away kind of some of the magic of the time, I think. So I prefer to kind of use the more Christianized version. And if anybody's interested in the links for that, I don't know if you do show notes or whatever, I can give you the links for those. Yeah. So in a nutshell, your Three Cauldron power centers are found, it is thought, because they don't say in the poem where they're found, but most people agree. And if you do the journeys and start to connect yourself, you may well agree with this, but you can test it yourself. You can do the journeys. So we start in the lower cauldron, which is thought to be found in the gut, the lower part of your body. And that's your lower cauldron, or Corrie Goriath in Gaelic. I don't speak Gaelic, by the way, so apologies to any Gaelic speakers if I'm butchering the pronunciation, but it's Corrie Goriath. And in your lower cauldron is your root of self. So the poem goes that when you're born, this cauldron is upright and full of your life force energy. Who you are is meant to be there to sustain you through your childhood and as you become an adult. But unfortunately for many of us, that cauldron doesn't always stay upright because it needs a loving, attached environment. And many of us suffer with varying degrees of childhood issues. Adverse childhood experiences, if you want to use the current scientific name for it. And those can range from very serious to actually quite mild on the face of it, but it can still really affect you. And your cauldron can lose some of this power, this life force, this sense of self. One could kind of connect that to soul loss or power loss, but they don't talk about that. That's like a core shamanic, those are core shamanic terms. So you would need to do the work yourself to really work out what that means for you and if there is a crossover between those two kind of terminologies. So your life force is in your root of self is in your lower cauldron, and the work there really is, you can't think your way back to a clear cauldron. So that's a very somatic experience. You're looking at fear, anxiety, depression, just like the drivers of all of these things that many of us struggle with. And things that can help your lower cauldron would be like shamanic healing, for one, can be very useful, but that's never, I find that's not ever in isolation. It's the spiritual aspect of a full wholeness pie, right? So also breath work, somatic healing, EDMR, EFT, whatever your poison, the physical body somatic stuff that you work with, that's kind of your lower cauldron bag. And then we move up to...
Would that include the lower cauldron? Would that include, say, for example, as a woman, your womb? Does it include like the sort of sexual area as well?
No, there's nothing in the poem about that. So now we're getting into the realms of the creative. So we have the wisdom, but it would be up to each person to really do the kind of deeper cauldrons path work, which is what I write about, to find where that lies for you. For me, likely yes. But because I want to be really clear about like what
we know, what we don't know,
what we know and what we don't know, right? So that would make sense, not only because of the actual position of it. Excuse me. So then we move up to the mid cauldron, which I guess is more like your heart area, which is really interesting because you've got your gut brain, they now know. And you have your heart brain, which they now know, and your head brain, which is where your upper cauldron is, right? So it's like the three brains. So I get very excited. So then you're in your mid cauldron, which is the place of like emotional intelligence or lack thereof. It's your shadow. It's the stuff you can use your brain to get to. It's like your ego monkey self, the bit that's like freaking out and reacting badly and having tantrums or trying to do work, or all the places of these things, the shadow and all that. And the kinds of things that can really help with your mid cauldron would be your like boundary work. So that's another big thing I talk about in various ways, is boundaries, spiritual boundaries, personal boundaries. So that's a really good thing to do for your mid cauldron. It could be things like talking therapy is really good for your mid cauldron, shadow work of any kind. And then we move up to the high cauldron, and that is the place of artistry, creativity, your higher self. And it's here that you can connect with Imbas. Imbas is the divine knowledge of the gods, of the Celtic gods. And it's said in the poem that this is where all artistry of all kinds comes from. So I guess for me, what that really means is it's where you find your healing spaces. It's where you can, your sacred space. It's where you can find if you're a writer, it's where the writing comes from. You feel that flow coming from you. And if you suffer from writer's block, then a cauldron's path can be something that you might find really helpful. So that's it in a nutshell.
Oh, I love that so much. And it just feels so I noticed as you were talking, I had chills several times. It's like, which for me is like that kind of embodied just knowing of truth, you know. I
Yeah.
always remember years ago I was recording with someone who was Dutch, I think, and he was like, "Oh, we call, you know, when you get goosebumps when you kind of like have that recognition of something," and he's like, "Oh, we call them truth bumps," like obviously in Dutch, but like
Oh,
Dutch is truth bumps. So I was like,
I
"Oh
didn't
my
know that.
goodness!"
That's so nice.
Yeah, so since then I always know them as truth bumps, but it feels as though you say it's like things that we can map across to other systems, and also, you know, science is more and more showing that, you know, actually these things are measurable and are known in a more materialist way, but you can just feel the truth of this. I love it so much too, so I can understand why you're so excited by it. And so what I'm interested in is, you mentioned shadow there, and of course, depending on, you know, we're looking at this from a shamanic frame, and you know, if we were looking at it through, for example, a pure sort of Jungian frame, we might be using other language. But I was interested in, I guess, looking at, you know, ultimately all of these places, I guess, could be, you could see, be seen as blocked or in shadow, or as you say, you know, like you know, soul separation. Would you see that with each cauldron there's a different way of working with them for that reason? And so you mentioned, for example, you know, there's more somatic work needed with the lower cauldron. So I'd love to know, like, what you see as kind of like, I guess, twofold. How, and you've mentioned this already, I just want to go deeper into it, like how
Hmm.
would, I'm going to use the word blockages just as a bit more
Yeah,
generic
that
term,
works.
might not be the best one. How would blockages each of those three show up, and then how can we unblock them?
Mm. So how blockages show up in your lower, if you have lower cauldron issues, then you will be that's like the base stuff. That's the stuff that we have when we first get onto a healing path, whatever the healing path is. It's a place where we really need to find a way to feel safe in our body,
Mm,
really. So the block there is this idea that we're no longer connected to a sense of self. We don't have self-esteem, self-confidence, self, all these selves, because it's missing, because it's left in some way, or it's tipped and it needs to be
mm,
reclaimed. So there is that like sense in core shamanism, of retrieval, which I work with absolutely. I trained in core shamanism. It's like I love it. So the blockages are caused by usually our childhood experiences, for better or worse, and can be unblocked by kind of the more somatic stuff, which I've talked about in a bit more detail. But when you get up to the mid cauldron up here, this is the place. These are blocked because of, I think, firstly because, okay, so we need to do our cauldrons in order. That's the thing. So when you jump straight
so it's
to,
like a flow
it's a
almost.
flow,
Yeah.
right? So if you jump straight to mid cauldron work and try and go into shadow, or putting up boundaries, and you don't have a sense of safety or a sense of self, you are going to fail at that. You're not going to manage. So you need to start at the
Mm,
bottom and work your way up. So blockages in your mid cauldron can be caused by an empty lower cauldron because there's no flow of energy there,
I see.
right? And
That
then
that for me sounds
mm,
like, sorry to interrupt, but I think
no,
it's
you're
so
okay.
helpful, you know, to like liken it to other things that people might have experienced themselves, and just through a different frame. For me, that's like, you know, shadow work's incredibly powerful, but it really has to include working with the child, the inner child first, to create that very safety. Is like that part, if the child doesn't feel safe to even embark on the process, it's like, even if the other shadow work was possible, which I'd question, it's actually going to be quite harmful, because it's kind of dragging the
Yeah,
child into, who's already feeling terrified, into an
yeah.
even more terrifying experience.
Exactly.
Mm,
So yeah, you could. It's very much like inner child work.
mm,
Again, like you can definitely weave all these things together when you get like a sense of how to work with the cauldrons. So my thing is like I work with British or Celtic Indigenous wisdom, but also my training was in creativity. So I'm like, whatever works for you. That these things can all be woven together really
mm,
magically, and there's no limits to how someone can can do that for themselves. And I think when we put limits, then when we box people in and say it's this way or this way, then the magic can get kind of lost. Anyway.
No, I love that. I love your openness. There was a question there. What was it? Hang on. Oh, that was it. So because you've also got your background in core shamanism, have you seen that when you are working with people, so for example, doing healing work, you can actually see that these blockages are in these locations specifically in a way that makes sense when you then know, more about that person and what's required for them?
So do you mean I use the Three Cauldrons in my healing sessions?
Yes, I meant it more though at a level of, I mean, obviously we all see different, well, you're using the word see in a kind of broad way.
Broad way, yes.
So I meant it's more like, when you are working with someone in a healing capacity, do you see, in quote marks, blockages in these particular locations in a way that you now see like, that makes sense, that's why I would see those blockages in those areas, because they do relate to these particular kinds of...
No, I wouldn't. No, that it didn't translate like that for me. I think I'll tell you, it was actually kind of the opposite. So more what happened for me was that I did my training and then did it in the way that I was taught, and it just naturally progressed. And because I have a tendency to not like to be boxed in, I just the guides just did what they did. And then it turns out that a lot of what I do for my own personal work, I can be quite visual, but when I'm working with clients, it's much more physical for me. So physical and inner knowing, the quote marks that you see, but you see through, I see through my body. Yes. So for me, it was more like the whole concept of, we're getting into it now, eh? Okay. So the whole concept of like...
I like to go really deep into these things.
So the whole concept of separating soul retrieval, power retrieval, extraction, very quickly became very difficult for me. I couldn't do it. And I found that my healing sessions were like quite, they just weren't hitting the spot in the way that I would have expected. And it's because I was getting in the way, but it's because it was like I was trying to like box the guides in by saying, right, well, we're going to do this or we're going to do this, or doing a diagnostic journey first and figuring out what was needed. And actually now, I don't always even see what, it just doesn't chop up like that. It's not chopped. It's one very sort of primal, visceral experience where I'm so in the space of the healing space with with my client and in the healing space that I'm often to the point where I don't know what's going on cognitively because I'm just in it so much. But then what happens for me is I'm given a healing vision for my client, so then they can understand what's happened for them and be able to take that forward. And the other thing that I do these days, which is a bit different as well, is that clients will often have worked with me in other ways first before they come for a healing. So I'm very available online. I have various online communities and loads of free stuff that people can do that really start to help with this lower cauldron, like little things, just like reclaiming just like small pieces of life force and energy, so that when they do get to such an intense thing as a shamanic healing, then they do have that bit more of that sense of safety and they can handle the like some the sort of, they're ready for it sort of thing. So for me, I don't see it like that. It's much more of a sort of primal, visceral thing. So I couldn't say one way or the other, Yeah.
That really makes sense. When you see the healing vision, from what I understand, this might be me putting my own understanding on what you've said. So let me know if this isn't quite right. As we were talking about earlier, like a shamanic healing isn't a kind of panacea. It's not a magic bullet. It's kind of part of a, longer journey, which may well take a lifetime.
Yeah.
And I think knowing that, whether it be working with a shaman or, a plant teacher, recognizing like there needs to be a kind of like way that we're living that ultimately needs to change, in order to continue to create wholeness, let's say. When you see that healing vision, does that relate more to the cauldrons in terms of how they can go forward in working with the cauldrons in their life to, consolidate and move forward with the healing.
Yeah, usually that's where you'll find that. So, if they're really desperately needing to go down to back to the lower cauldron, usually it's back to the lower cauldron. Often people miss stuff in the lower cauldron and try and jump too fast, which I really would like to.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, I'd really like to get into that, because that's actually really something I feel quite strongly about. So often the changes that they're encouraged to make, or the the things they're encouraged to look at, if there's a lower cauldron issue, it will be quite somatic, in other words. And there can be a lot of ritual, simple ritual, not complicated if it's lower cauldron work, simple ritual, little daily things that folk can do to really draw. It's just, for me, it's just about supporting people. So for myself, when I hit shamanism, I was so low, I had nothing left. And you could have given me all the words in the world. You could have given me the secrets of the universe, and it wouldn't have mattered, because I had no life force left. I couldn't apply it. So one of the things I'm really passionate about is helping people who are that low know how to just really, really gently and slowly just start to reclaim some life force in their lower cauldron, so that they can then find a way to, right, okay, we can get out of this hole and out of this mud. So it's often that. If it's mid-cauldron work, it'll be much more practical. It'll be like you have various, I always go back to boundaries. You have various boundary issues that you need to deal with, or you have communication issues, or for women, it's usually, for me, the people that I work with, not everybody in the world, but the people I often work with have saviour issues. I work with a drama triangle, 3 points. Saviour, perpetrator, yes. Victim, soften victim or saviour. So they're giving their life force away to others, that sort of thing. So that's all like kind of, the mid cauldron. And then when it's upper cauldron, that's so rare, because by the time you get to the point where you're connected properly with your upper cauldron, then you're able to kind of find that kind of flow and movement. So then when people turn up and they're like, I'm a shamanic practitioner, I'm a Reiki practitioner, I'm some sort of spiritual energy healer, but I have problems connecting, or I have, confidence issues, or, I can't seem to, I really want to, but I can't say, or I've trained, but I never actually put my training into practice. These like blocks that people often come up against is because they jumped all of the lower work straight to trying to connect with the divine wisdom, but there's no flow of energy through your core, which I guess would be the hollow bone, right? So it's right through your core.
Yes.
So you're missing all this stuff at the bottom in order for the energy to flow, in order for you to connect with confidence and ballast.
I love this so much. There's my goodness, it's unbelievably like closely mapped. The way that we work is kind of inspired in a way by the world tree, but we talk about it at that, like, the root level as the kind of the soul and body work. The trunk is sovereignty, which very much aligns to what you're talking about here about boundaries. And also we use the we work with it as the victim triangle, using the work of Lynn Forrest, but it maps exactly. And then the branches of the trees, that's the spiritual, the sort of ascension work. And so it's exactly what you've just been describing. And I agree with what you just spoke on.
Yeah. Sovereignty is the word in the middle of the Celtic wheel. It's not a medicine wheel, but the wisdom, well, Sam talks about it, my friend, she talks about it as a wisdom wheel. And sovereignty is at the centre of that. And sovereignty is a massive word that comes through in lots and lots of different Celtic texts as well. It's like that word of like, it's the values of Celtic culture, sovereignty, courage, truth, impeccability of tongue.
Yes, I love that. And these are things that we were working with years before we started to like see how it was showing up elsewhere. Which again, it's just amazing, isn't it, how these things are shown to us. But what you said there about people jumping into that upper cauldron work is something that, oh my goodness, it's so interesting, the similarities between what you're passionate about and same here. Is because the original work that we came from was ascension spirituality, Like that's exactly where I was. Like when my father died, I kind of got blasted open to spirit, and using the language here, like at a kind of upper cauldron level.
Yeah.
Thought I'd like discovered like the answer to everything. And it was only over the years that I realized, you know, one way or another, I was called to do the work on the other two cauldrons. And then I've so seen how, you know, people who were part of that community of the kind of more ascension spirituality now come to us to do the work with the other two areas. And it's something I think, again, that because we have a much more, I think in our modern culture, it is so much more focused on that. It's so easy to miss the importance of the other two.
The magic is in the mundane, guys.
Really
the magic is in the mundane. It's not in heaven, it's not in the sky, it's not in, you know, journey work and spiritual connection are supposed to enhance your life, not help you escape from your life. So that's kind of like how I always like try and ask people to be self-reflective around what their spiritual life does for them. Is it helping you to be more connected and be more vulnerable with your family and make good choices for yourself and feel confident in the life that you have? Or is it just like a way that you just escape and you're like, no thanks, I'll just go over here and, you know, play my drum in the woods instead of really being in your life?
Yeah,
that's a cauldrons issue.
Yeah, that's a cauldrons issue. I absolutely love it. So if I don't think we got to this part. So if when someone has done the work of the other two cauldrons, what do you see as helpful when someone is at the point of opening their upper cauldron?
So in the poem, they talk about the ways to really do that are, and just try to get the right order. You have 4 divisions of 2 divisions of joy, which is human joy and divine joy. So human joy is connection, communication, community, being fully and wholly in your human self and in the human realm, because that's where we live. And divine joy is faith. So it's finding your faith. So for me, and some people are quite triggered by the word faith, so you can choose a different word if it makes you feel more comfortable, but I use the word faith. I have complete faith in what I do. I have faith in it for myself, and I don't need anybody else to have faith in what I do in order to feel valid on my path. So it's finding, doing this lower work, so that once you've done the lower work and you make the intention, or you open yourself up to the healing arts, as it were, I find people naturally fall where they're going to go, and the energy starts to flow naturally. But I think the other thing to add in there as well is this sense of sacrifice, which is often missing in our modern world. So and I guess under sacrifice there's also offerings. More traditionally is a big part of Celtic culture, and it's like, what are you willing to, and people get sacrifice wrong, right? So they think it's like giving, so it's the saviour in women often, right? So they think sacrifice is like sacrificing yourself on the altar of your family, so there's nothing left for yourself. And that's the dark side of sacrifice, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the sacrifice that one makes for the greater good of your community, but then you get back as well. So it's like, you know, it's almost like reciprocity, or your sacrifice to the gods without attachment or expectation of anything in return, genuinely. But then that just creates this beautiful reciprocal relationship that you have with the divine. And for me, I'll give an example, if you like, of kind of a meaningful sacrifice for me recently, is that I've just had my second child. Well, she'll be 2 in July, so I haven't just had her at all. But the meaningful sacrifice for me there is I had my first child when I was 21, and Eve's now in her 20s, right? So I didn't do a very good job the first time round, and it was a bit of a shit show for me and for Eve. And we've come out the other side of that and learned a lot from it. But the second time round now, as I do it as from a perspective of sacrifice and community and communion and real vulnerable connection with this little soul that I have been tasked to bring up in this world. You know, I've chosen to breastfeed, and I'm very lucky, and I know that not everybody can, so this is just for me, but my meaningful sacrifice is breastfeed. I breastfeed her at night, I breastfeed her to sleep, I go to bed with Marin, and we go to bed together, and she's never left to sleep alone. And these are all the things that I've chosen to do, and that's a sacrifice for me. I don't sleep as well as I used to. I look a lot older than I used to, and more quickly than, you know, perhaps I would ordinarily age. And those are all deeply, deeply meaningful sacrifices for me, and I would never change it. And that's the other thing about the magic being in the mundane, and this and the sacred being in the everyday. And, you know, Celtic people were farmers, and, you know, they lived a hard life, and this would the year was split into two, so the males and females would actually separate during the summer months, where the females would go up to the hills with the animals, and the men would do the raiding and the fighting. And there was the class of druids and you know, the holy people, but that was quite small. Most people were just people living a life, and I think that it's really important to bring that into sharp focus when we want to support others on a path.
Yeah, I love that so much. It's and again, this is where I think we can learn a lot from cultures where they do still have like intact lineages of shamanism. I'm forever grateful for my own teacher, Jez Hughes. He has a kind of very close kind of symbiotic relationship with indigenous Mexican shamans, which, you know, like just so blessed, because as well as the very intentional work to be kind of reclaiming the shamanism of this land, again, the doors that they've opened through sharing of their practices so generously has been, you know, hugely meaningful. And one of the particular things that they have just, I think it's that just like embodied modeling, you know, when you actually see someone live in the way that you've talked about with that level of sacrifice, and very literally like the offerings practice, and how it's just like living, it's just like breathing, it's like just doing anything else. It's like, of course you would do that. And I think that's something, like you said, we've really lost the understanding of that in our culture. And it's, for me, it's one of the things that I think has been so important for my reclamation of what it means to be deep connected to this land, is that kind of reciprocity. I can never say the bloody word. I always go to say, I'm going to say it this time. Reciprocity. I love that. I can do it this time. I can do it this time. Never can. But that R word. It's like, it's essential for that. It's absolutely essential. And I think it's something that, again, that it's so, I'm so glad you raised it. I did literally a whole episode with Jez, literally on the topic of making offerings.
Yeah, it's a huge part of our, should be a huge part of our culture, and it isn't. But there's lots of amazing stories and evidence and for British shamanic offerings in many different ways. And you know, there's lots of evidence of votive offerings where they would offer stones that were like shaped like different body parts, and they think that was for healing specific ailments. And there's lots of folk magic in Scotland that talk about pebbles, and then you've got the painted Pictish pebbles as well, so like that people would think that they maybe decorated to give as offerings. So there's all these like little threads that we can start to pull together. But I did want to touch on ethics in lineage, because that's something that I've struggled with understanding how to do that well. So my teacher was amazing. I know Jez, so I also know he's amazing when it comes to like ethics and the way that one interacts with a spiritual life. But we don't have an unbroken lineage in British shamanism, and and I've never worked with Indigenous people particularly. I do have Indigenous friends online, but I've never been. Like, I know that you guys and Jez go every year, and I think that's amazing. But what I've noticed is that because we have this broken lineage and we have a bit of wisdom that we need to put into practice creatively, because we don't actually have step-by-step guides. Those don't exist from the Iron Age. There's hints and sniffs and ideas, but you just need to get creative. You just need to like get that like direct revelation on the go, really, to be able to kind of live a British shamanic way of life. And we can only do our best. But what's missing from that is like the passed down ethical standards that one should hold oneself to. And we live in a modern world, so we've got to understand that, we're weaving. I mean, your podcast guests are all probably well au fait with this, but we're weaving ancient magic into our modern life, and we have to try and do that in an ethical way. So many people are just like, oh yeah, I'm an empath and I feel energy, or I get messages for people and tell them without permission, and I bang on about this a lot in my groups around ethical practice. And I think that the cauldrons can be super helpful, because if you're trying to work from your upper cauldron and you haven't done this lower work, then you're inevitably going to end up acting in a way that isn't ethical, because you don't know any better, because you've not done the work, and all this shit that you're carrying at the bottom just drives what you think is a spiritual connection or space holding, but it turns out not to be so safe, or not to be the case at all in some cases.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And you can see, say, the price we're paying for that lack of handed down understanding of the ethics. Yeah, I think it's so important. So the time has absolutely flown by, as I suspected it would. Before we close, is there anything that you think would be helpful for listeners to know that are hearing? And again, I think because this is, again, from my perspective, like this is wisdom that actually like is in our blood and bones. I think one way or another, most people listening to this will feel something in this for themselves, is my sense. For someone wanting to perhaps just start to deepen into like, okay, where is the work for me? What is, which cauldron is here for me? What would you say is kind of helpful for them to look out for? Kind of initial next steps? What would you suggest?
So what you can do is you can simply journey to each of your cauldrons and ask. And what I see with a lot of the people I work with is that they'll only, maybe in the beginning, only be able to travel to their, so like an internal journey, basically. You only be able to journey to the spirit of your lower cauldron, and you won't see anything on the other two. So that's very clear that you're in your lower cauldron area. Sometimes people see lower and mid, and then you know that you've got kind of like a balance between the two there. So it's not that, I just want to clarify, it's not that you have to do all of the work in the lower and all of the work in the middle. It's just, there's just a cycle that goes round. So for me, I'm like, as soon as an issue comes up for me, I'm like, oh, back down the cauldrons I go, right to the bottom, where is the root? And then what behaviour am I dealing with? And then finding ultimate healing at the top. So you get kind of that. But I would say journeying to your cauldrons. There's also a free workshop on my website with a healing attached, a kind of cauldrons healing attached to that your listeners are welcome to access if they want to.
Oh, fabulous. And where can they find that?
That's centreforshamanism.com.
Wonderful, very simple, and we'll make sure the link is on the show notes as well. Well, this has been just such a pleasure, Rhonda. Really has been everything I could have asked for. It really has. And it feels as though it's a kind of a deeper invitation for me personally as well to, again, we're kind of like, I think all of us that are in this work are kind of like looking for the threads that are going to take us deeper back into, again, what I feel is our birthrights, our heritage. So it's for me been a real, something personally has been awoken in this conversation too. So thank you.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. It's just been really lovely. I do love to talk about it a lot.
Yes, I can feel the passion in you, a woman after my own heart. Well, thank you so much, Rhonda. I really, really appreciate you and the work you're doing.
All right, blessings. Thank you.